On a scorching Cairo morning, as the city shimmered under a relentless sun, Egypt stunned the world by taking the unprecedented step of restricting the Nile's flow downstream. The decision sent shockwaves through the region, marking a turning point in the country's long and complex relationship with its lifeblood river. It was a desperate move, born out of necessity, to secure Egypt's rapidly dwindling water reserves and stave off a looming crisis that threatened millions. The shockwaves rippled outward, from the parched fields of Sudan to the bustling cities of Ethiopia, and even to the halls of the United Nations. The age-old rhythm of the Nile, which had defined life for countless generations, was suddenly and dramatically interrupted. The Nile, once a symbol of unity and shared prosperity, now became the epicenter of regional anxiety, suspicion, and mounting geopolitical tension. This was no longer just a dispute over water rights. It had become an existential crisis for Egypt and its neighbors, threatening the very fabric of societies that had depended on the river for centuries. Egypt's government described the move as a last resort, a measure taken for national survival. But to other Nile nations, it was seen as an act of hydro-hegemony, a bold assertion of control that risked unraveling decades of fragile diplomacy and cooperation. The immediate fallout was chaos, panic buying in markets, fear and uncertainty among farmers who depended on the river, and a sense of dread that rippled through every community along the Nile's banks. Security forces tightened their grip along the river, as border tensions flared and communities braced for the unknown. The entire region was suddenly on edge, teetering between hope and despair. The story of this blockade is the story of a river under immense strain, shaped by millennia of history, the relentless pressures of climate change, explosive population growth, and the ever-shifting landscape of regional politics. To truly understand how we reached this critical tipping point, we must look back to the very origins of Egyptian civilization, when the Nile was both a giver of life and a source of power. And we must also look forward, to a future where water is poised to become the world's most contested and precious resource, shaping the destinies of nations. Today, the Nile's waters carry the burden of survival for over 250 million people, each one dependent on its flow for food, livelihood, and hope. As the world watched with bated breath, one question echoed across continents. What happens next, when the river that shaped civilization itself stands still? Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile, a phrase that captures the river's profound importance throughout history. For thousands of years, the Nile has been the artery that allowed civilization to flourish in an otherwise harsh and unforgiving desert. This ancient truth still defines the nation today, shaping the lives and destinies of millions who depend on its waters. Each year, the river's annual floods once transformed barren desert into fertile farmland, fueling the rise of the pharaohs and giving birth to Egypt's unique culture, religion, and even its calendar. The rhythm of the Nile's waters set the pace for planting, harvest, and celebration. The Nile was worshipped as a god, carefully measured and ingeniously engineered. Its cycles dictated every aspect of daily life, from rituals to architecture. When the floods failed, famine and hardship followed. When they surged beyond control, destruction and chaos came to the land. This deep dependence drove remarkable innovations in irrigation, water management, and even led to the birth of geometry, as Egyptians measured and mapped their world. Today, over 95% of Egypt's 110 million people live along the Nile's narrow banks, relying on it for water, food, transportation, and industry. The river remains the heart of Egyptian society. Modern methods and technology have replaced many ancient practices, but the fundamental reliance on the Nile's life-giving waters remains unchanged. The Nile is not just a river, it is Egypt's identity, its memory, and its hope for the future, with past and future forever entwined in its flow. Without the Nile, the nation's very existence would be unimaginable, a strip of green in a sea of sand. The river's fate is the nation's fate. As the Nile flows, so does Egypt's story, past, present, and future. For centuries, Egypt adapted to the Nile's natural cycles, but the 20th century brought a quest to control the river. The Aswan High Dam, completed in 1970, ended the unpredictable floods, created Lake Nasser, and provided reliable water and power. This engineering marvel fueled Egypt's growth, but at a cost. Trapped silt forced farmers to rely on chemical fertilizers, and the delta began to erode. The dam's ecological impacts were profound: declining fish stocks, new diseases, and a vulnerable delta. The transformation of the Nile from a wild river to a managed system solved old problems but created new ones. Egypt's mastery over the river proved double-edged, setting the stage for today's mounting pressures. The benefits of control came with unintended consequences. Now, Egypt faces challenges the dam's builders never imagined. The security of the Aswan High Dam, once a symbol of Egypt's control over its destiny, is now threatened by explosive population growth and mounting environmental challenges. Egypt's population has quadrupled since the dam's construction, swelling from around 20 million to over 100 million people today, and continues to rise rapidly. Yet, despite this surge, Egypt's share of Nile water remains fixed by decades-old agreements, unable to keep pace with the growing demand. As a result, per capita water availability has plummeted, falling far below the internationally recognized water poverty line. Climate models predict even hotter temperatures and more erratic rainfall patterns in the years ahead, which will increase evaporation from the river and reservoirs, making water management even more difficult and unpredictable. Meanwhile, upstream countries like Ethiopia are rising, determined to harness the Nile's power for their own development and energy needs. Egypt's historical dominance over the river is being challenged as upstream nations build new dams and assert their rights to the Nile's waters. These mounting pressures, demographic, environmental, and political, interact and intensify, squeezing Egypt's lifeline from all sides. A growing population raises the stakes, climate change adds layers of uncertainty and risk, and regional ambitions fuel fierce competition for every drop of water. The result is a perfect storm of scarcity and tension, with the potential to reshape the region's future. Egypt is now forced to consider drastic and unprecedented measures to secure its future and protect its people. The stability of the Nile, once taken for granted, is no longer assured. The stakes for Egypt and the entire region have never been higher. At the heart of the crisis stands Ethiopia's Grand Renaissance Dam, the largest hydroelectric project in Africa. For Ethiopia, the GERD is a symbol of progress, promising electricity and economic transformation. But for Egypt, the dam's massive reservoir threatens to cut vital water supplies, especially if filled rapidly during drought. Years of negotiations have failed to produce a binding agreement on how the dam will be filled and operated. Ethiopia insists on its right to develop. Egypt demands protection for its water security. Sudan, caught in the middle, sees both risks and rewards. The GERD is more than a dam. It's a symbol of shifting power and unresolved colonial-era grievances. The standoff has pushed the region to the brink, with no diplomatic solution in sight. Facing water scarcity and upstream threats, Egypt is investing heavily in desalination, turning seawater into fresh water. Dozens of new plants are planned along the coasts, powered increasingly by renewable energy. This technological shift is costly and energy-intensive, but it offers a drought-proof water source independent of the Nile. Egypt is also modernizing irrigation, recycling wastewater, and promoting conservation to stretch every drop. Yet, desalinated water is too expensive for large-scale farming, and transporting it inland is a major challenge. These innovations are vital, but they can't fully replace the Nile's volume. For now, the river remains Egypt's irreplaceable core. Adaptation is essential, but the Nile's flow is still the nation's lifeblood. The Nile Basin faces a stark choice: cooperation or conflict. Regional agreements could optimize water use, maximize power generation, and foster economic integration. The Nile Basin Initiative offers a framework, but mistrust and failed negotiations persist, especially after the GERD's construction. Decades of suspicion and competing narratives make compromise difficult. Egypt's dominance is seen as injustice upstream. Egypt sees any loss as existential. Without cooperation, unilateral actions risk escalating tensions and destabilizing the region. The Nile could unite its nations or drive them apart. The stakes have never been higher. Human demands on the Nile overshadow its role as a living ecosystem. Dams like Aswan and GERD have transformed habitats, blocked fish migrations, and disrupted natural cycles. The Nile Delta is sinking and eroding, starved of sediment and threatened by rising seas. Critical lagoons and wetlands are vanishing, endangering biodiversity and local livelihoods. Environmental degradation reduces fish stocks, farmland, and tourism, deepening economic woes. The health of the Nile's ecosystem is inseparable from the region's prosperity. Sustainable management must balance human needs with environmental survival. The river's future depends on restoring its natural resilience. Egypt's hypothetical blockade of the Nile highlights a region at a crossroads, caught between rising demand, climate uncertainty, and shifting power. The Aswan High Dam once promised control, but its legacy is mixed. New challenges have replaced old ones. Egypt's turn to desalination and recycling signals a new era, but the Nile remains irreplaceable. The crisis here mirrors global water tensions. Shared rivers are flashpoints for conflict and cooperation. The lesson is clear: only transboundary collaboration can secure a shared future. Pragmatic, science-based agreements could turn the Nile into a source of regional growth. The alternative is escalating disputes and instability. The Nile's next chapter depends on the choices made now. Can its people learn to share before they run out of water and time?